All right, thanks. So this is a bit of a sequel to Lewis's talk yesterday. It's not a talk I've ever given before, so we will see how it goes. Obviously, the Cooperative AI Foundation thinks that kind of traditional research, and I'll make clear what I mean by traditional research in a sec, is one way to have a big impact. So you could have theoretical insights into how to get AI systems, how to cooperate, the conditions under which agents can cooperate, and all that. You can build better algorithms for building AI systems that cooperate. You can have kind of surprising new empirical insights that tell us something important about how real world systems behave. Those are the sorts of things that kind of traditional research roles, academia or in labs, those are some ways that you can have a big impact on cooperative AI. So in this talk, though, I'm going to focus on what I'll call non-traditional research-related roles. So that's a kind of, I don't know if it's the best term. It's a big umbrella term for a cluster of roles that involve some kind of, that are helped by having some kind of research background, but don't themselves look like kind of traditional research. So, for example, doing applied research in a nonprofit, working in policy, working in grant making, field building are examples of the kinds of things that I want to talk about. And I do think many of the most impactful roles are non-traditional. And so in this talk, I'm just going to be going through some general considerations around choosing an impactful career and why I think many of the most impactful roles might be non-traditional, and then give some specific examples of those kinds of roles. So just as a reminder, I think Lewis talked a little bit about this yesterday, and it's probably in some of the intro materials, but at the Cooperative AI Foundation, we like to think about impact using this importance, tractability, neglectedness framework, ITN, which says that you ought to work on problems that will lead to lots of good if they're solved, that is important, are possible to solve, they're tractable, and they aren't being worked on already by lots of people, and we don't expect that they will be in the future. That's neglectedness. And I want to give some reasons to think that many of the most ITN opportunities might be non-traditional. So these are going to be kind of high-level, abstract considerations, and then again we'll look at some examples later. So when it comes to importance, one way that non-traditional roles are different than many roles, kind of traditional research roles, is that they can be more targeted at real-world impact. So for example, developing standards or policies that will determine the properties AI systems are built to have is a way, is kind of much more directly targeted at having a positive impact than a lot of more basic research. Same goes with figuring out what organizations and research agendas receive funding that is doing grant making. Neglectedness. So people with strong research skills who are both willing and able to do non-traditional research roles are quite rare. And so I think this is a reason to think that if you are willing to do that, you can have a lot of impact. So some reasons that those sorts of people are rare. There's a lot of things, if you're a PhD student or something, that will keep you on a traditional research track that you might not necessarily endorse if you sit down and think carefully about it. So just plain old inertia, lack of exposure to other career paths, various kinds of social pressures from your lab mates or your advisor or the field that you've invested a lot in, is one reason why these sorts of people might be rare. Another is that researchers are just often simply enjoy research more than other work and aren't necessarily as impact-driven. And finally, tractability. So one thing that you can do in a non-traditional research, non-traditional role is make more use of existing insights and tools rather than creating entirely new ones, which is more in the domain of traditional research. So it's not the kind of thing you'll win a Turing Award for, but if you're impact motivated, you can maybe get a lot more done by using existing insights and tools rather than trying to come up with new ones. So do I have examples here? Well, I'll get to some examples when I give some concrete examples of roles. All right, so those are some high-level reasons to think that kind of non-traditional roles might be kind of competitive when it comes to ITM. Just a few things to say about the cooperative AI landscape in particular. So unfortunately, there aren't that many cooperative AI specific non-traditional opportunities yet. So most of the opportunities doing cooperative AI specific stuff are either in traditional research roles or at the Cooperative AI Foundation. But I think we ought to expect a lot of growth in the opportunities as multi-agent risks and opportunities become increasingly obvious. So even over the next 12 months, we may see big increases in agent capabilities. We might see kind of massive increase in the actual deployment of AI systems in the world, interacting with one another. And this may be a kind of wake-up call for the relevance of cooperative AI in the same way that ChatGPT was a wake-up call about AI in many ways. Whether or not that happens in the next 12 months, I think we should expect it to happen pretty soon, given the way things are going. And in the meantime, you can build transferable skills. Like even if you have your heart set on working with cooperative AI, you can build transferable skills doing other stuff. So, for example, there's a big ecosystem of safety stuff to do besides cooperative AI. So, if, for instance, you really wanted to do cooperative AI evals, you could build skills at doing single agent evals at existing orgs like Meter, Apollo, the AI safety institutes that are doing other kinds of evals. And finally, just a disclaimer. So I don't want to confidently claim that the examples that I'm going to go through are particularly ITN, or that any particular examples is highly ITN. So impact assessment is really hard. And I also personally don't have a perfect overview of the landscape, especially on the policy side. So there might be lots of like things that I'm not aware of, like opportunities that I'm not aware of. There might be facts about some of the opportunities that I list that would change, the assessment a lot. So what I really want you to take away from the talk is not a recommendation to do any one specific thing, but to convey some general patterns for thinking about impact, and then maybe some pointers for directions to start exploring. But yeah, form your own views, talk to people, read lots of stuff. Yeah. All right. So the first direction for doing non-traditional stuff is evaluations and standards. So cooperative AI is, it at some level is just about getting AI systems to have certain properties, certain social welfare enhancing properties. So directly working to make sure systems are built to have those properties seems like a pretty important thing to be doing. And there will be lots of kind of non-traditional research ways of doing that. So Lewis in his talk yesterday flashed this flow chart where sort of path to impact from, first we want to identify the conditions for cooperation. Then we want to identify the capabilities agents need to have to fulfill those conditions. We need to be able to evaluate scalably those properties. And once we have those evaluations in hand, we can actually start writing down specifications that we want systems to have, or designing standards that systems are required to fulfill. And I'm talking about the kind of later parts of this pipeline now. So as you probably know, evals and standards are kind of central to the contemporary AI safety discourse. So first of all, they're just like the training objectives that AI systems themselves are given to make them, at least, in Anthropic's terminology, harmless, helpful, and honest. So there's Claude's constitution, which specifies different properties that are aimed at, again, making Claude harmless, helpful, and honest. OpenAI recently released their model specification. So So obviously being able to train systems with these properties requires being able to evaluate them. Labs have recently made voluntary commitments related to safety evals and deployments, basically saying, we're going to require that our models pass these evals before we deploy them. So there's Anthropic, OpenAI, and GDM have, I've linked to their versions of this kind of thing here. There's a growing independent evaluation ecosystem. So I mentioned Meter as a kind of nonprofit research org that focuses on evaluating frontier models for alignment and control related properties. And governments are increasingly interested in evals and standards. So there was the U.S. executive order, which implicated evals and standards. AI safety institutes have been created in the UK and the US, among several other countries. There was the EU AI Act, which you might know about. And so, yeah, evals standards are a big deal for, again, obvious reasons. We want the models to have particular safety-related properties, and we need to be able to make sure that they do. So the kinds of properties that people that are kind of part of this discourse thus far are things like offensive content, biases, CBRN capabilities, chemical, bio, radiological, nuclear, the ability to manipulate, the ability to autonomously replicate outside of the server. But there are very few people working on shovel-ready proposals for cooperative AI evals and standards, which makes this quite a neglected area. So I've said a bit about importance and neglectedness. I also think evals might just be quite tractable. So while we don't have shovel-ready proposals, there's lots of existing knowledge of the conditions for cooperation floating around in established fields. I put this diagram from Lewis's talk from some work that some co-authors and I did, breaking down the conditions for cooperation just as an example of that kind of existing knowledge. There's a lot of thinking on evaluation for cooperative AI scattered throughout the community. People in this room have, for example, worked on some of these papers or have otherwise thought about evaluation. People at the Cooperative AI Foundation have thought about it. And because there is this existing and growing evals ecosystem, people are building tools for evaluating AI systems that we can adapt. So a lot of the pieces for building evals are out there, and they kind of just need to be put together into shovel-ready proposals, is my view. So how might one get started on this? So when it comes to the more technical side, developing specifications or evals that we want. So the Cooperative AI Foundation may do more on evals. I don't want to make any commitments around that. We don't have any definite plans, but it's definitely something we're quite interested in. This is something that you might be able to make some progress on in a PhD project. And again, you might get experience with other kinds of evals at research nonprofits or at the AI safety institutes, and later transition to working on cooperative AI when you built up those skills. And there's more of an ecosystem around evaluation for cooperative AI in particular. Labs are doing some of this. And then there's more on the policy side, pushing for standards to actually be adopted or being in a position to do so when those proposals exist, which you might do again by working at the relevant government agencies or in think tanks like RAND or the Center for the Governance of AI. All right. The second example that I want to go through is capacity building, which is another thing that is maybe not so salient on the kind of more traditional research side, but is a way to have a lot of impact. So the question is, would you rather have one of yourself or 100 of yourself? That's a bit of a simplistic framing, but the idea is that often you can have a bigger impact by finding ways of unlocking other people's talents and getting a lot of parallel work going rather than working directly on problems yourself. And so by capacity building, I mean kind of very broadly activities aimed at getting more kind of quality weighted cooperative AI work in tow going. So some ways of building capacity include research leadership. Of course, this requires some research experience. So if you're quite earlier in your career, this might not make sense yet, but you can have that as an aspiration and take steps to building management leadership skills in addition to research. Specific kinds of research leadership might be mentorship. Of course, there's standard model of mentorship in academia, but there are also increasingly many ways of kind of non-traditional ways of mentoring young researchers. There's the MATS program, which some of you may have actually participated in. PIBS you might have heard of, and so on. Scoping out new research areas, figuring out what areas are important and can absorb a lot of talent, and writing them up and arguing for them is another thing you can do in this area. So of course, the original Open Problems in Cooperative AI paper is a big reason why we're all here. There's also the Foundations of Cooperative AI paper by the folks at the Focal Lab, which some of you I think know about. There's also grant making, so directing resources to the most impactful activities, creating educational resources. So for example, our new Intro to Cooperative AI course, shout out to Cecilia, who took the lead on building that. So those are some examples. And how does this score on importance, tractability, and neglectedness? Again, it's important because you can plausibly get a lot more stuff done if you unlock the talents of a lot more people rather than just working as an individual contributor. The cooperative AI is a young field, so we might expect there to be lots of low-hanging fruit when it comes to capacity building. And of course, very few people are working on this, so it's neglected. It's mostly us here at SAFE. Okay, there's lots of other non-traditional stuff you might want to do. AI policy analysis from a cooperative AI lens. Again, you might want to work at think tanks like RAND or GovAI. AI and collective decision-making is a big thing that some folks in the community are into. So there's the Collective Intelligence Project. AI and Democracy for Foundation is a very recently founded foundation, AI for Institutions. So I recommend you explore that as well. Yeah, I'm not going to take questions right now, but I'll have office hours at 11 in case you guys want to talk about any of that stuff in more detail. Thanks a lot.